I would like to suggest to you that the extent to which government in America has departed from the original design of inhibiting the destructive actions of man and invoking a common justice, the extent to which government has invaded the productive and creative areas, the extent to which the government in this country has assumed the responsibility for the security, welfare, and prosperity of our people is a measure of the extent to which socialism and communism have developed here in this land of ours. If we will measure this loss in freedom of choice, we will get an idea of just how close we are coming to authoritarianism. There was a time, about 120 years ago, when the average citizen in this country had somewhere between 95 and 98% freedom of choice as to what he did with each of his income dollars. That was because the take of government, federal, state, and local, was between 2 and 5% of the earned income of the people. But as government began more and more to invade the productive and the creative areas with the inevitable deficits, as government more and more assumed the responsibility for the welfare, security, and prosperity of the people, the percentage of the take of the people's earned income, regardless of how much the earned income went up, the percentage of the take of the earned income kept going up and up until today it is no longer 2 to 5% of the earned income of the people. It is now over 35%. Now, some of my friends say to me that I should not be concerned about this, that after all, on the average, we still have a 65% freedom of choice with our earned income or with our income dollars. I would like to interpolate here for a moment and suggest that we should be careful how we use this term on the average. Take a 40-hour week. A person goes to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, takes an hour off for luncheon, works until 5. That's 40 hours. The average person in this country has to work all day Monday and until 2:15 on Tuesday for government before he can start working for himself. But if the individual has been extraordinarily successful, he finds that he has to work all day Monday, all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday, all day Thursday, and until noon on Friday for government before he can start working for himself. He only has Friday afternoon to work for himself. Nonetheless, on the average, we do have 65% freedom of choice with our earned income. But please take no solace from this fact, for it has been discovered, as research work has been done on the fiscal behavior of nations covering a period of many centuries, that whenever the take of the people's earned income by government reaches a certain high level, usually it's around 20 to 25%, that these governments have throughout history and do today resort to inflation as a means of financing. And by inflation, I mean increasing the volume of the money. These governments will resort to inflation with popular approval. And apparently it is because that most of the people are naive enough to believe that they can have their cake and eat it too. That is, they can continue to have their so-called benefits without having to pay for them. These people not quite understanding that inflation is the most unjust and the cruelest tax of all. There are numerous ways governments have inflated. You may recall reading in your history books about coin clipping. That was where the sovereign called in the coin of the realm and clipped the edges. He kept the edges and returned the smaller pieces to the owners. That was a good stunt until the pieces got too small to be returned. The government was in dire financial straits and began the issuance of an irredeemable paper money known as assignats, secured not by gold, but by confiscated church properties. France, of course, went bankrupt under that. That is, if a government can be said to go bankrupt. In the Argentine, today, a situation with which I have had some familiarity, the government has had an annual expense of about 100 billion pesos. And all they have been able to collect by direct tax levies are 50 billion pesos. What do? They simply print 50 billion new pesos annually. Well, of course, you do not have to be a great economist to understand that when you increase the volume of the money, everything else being equal, the value of the money will tend to decline. And when money declines in its value, everything else being equal, prices will tend to rise. Should you have had money in the bank in the Argentine, or have had bonds, or have had Social Security, or insurance, those are practically worthless today in that country. We in this country have a system of inflation that has one distinguishing merit. It's so complex that hardly anyone can understand it. What we do here is to monetize debt. The more we go in debt, the more money we have. We have enormously increased our money supply since we began the programs of deficit financing and monetizing debt. The Russians, in my opinion, have the most honest system of dishonesty. What they do there is also quite simple. The government issues government bonds and forces the people to buy the government bonds. And then after the people have bought the government bonds, the government cancels the bonds. Quite a number of the Russian people are aware that there's some chicanery going on here. Actually, I wish that that were the system that we were using, because more people than now in this country would understand what is being done to them by this inflationary process. The fiscal concomitant of the welfare state or socialism or governmental interventionism, call it what you will, is inflation. Politically, there is no other way of financing this sort of thing except inflation. So if you want to assist in ridding this country of the danger of inflation, there's only one thing you can do to be helpful, and that is help to pare government back to its principal position. I want to say a few more things about inflation because it is particularly relevant to this country. To do this, I want to take a look at somebody else, because it's always difficult to look at ourselves. Let's take a look at France, which in numerous respects has resembled the United States economically. France began this government invasion of the productive and creative areas, that is, government assuming the responsibility for the security, welfare, and prosperity of the people in 1914. Now, if what I have said so far has been correct, the French franc should have lost some of its purchasing value, for I have said that there is no other means of financing the welfare state or socialism except by inflation, that inflation means the increasing of the volume of the money, and that when you increase the volume of the money, the value goes down. The franc, therefore, by reason of the French experience, should have gone down in its purchasing value during these years. How much has the franc lost in these years? It has lost more than 99.5% of its purchasing value. I was in Paris in 1918. I bought myself a fairly good dinner for 5 francs, which was the equivalent of a 1918 dollar. I didn't get to France again until 1947. I took a friend of mine to luncheon, admittedly a much better restaurant than I went to as a soldier boy in World War I, but I didn't pay 60 or 70 or 80 francs for the lunch for the two of us. I paid 3,400 francs. 2 years later, I was in Paris with my wife. We went to the same restaurant and had the same luncheon on account I wanted to test prices. I did not pay 3,400 for those two luncheons. I paid 4,100. Recently, the price for those two luncheons was about 6,000 francs. Visualize with me, if you will, a young Frenchman back in the year 1914. Let us say he was in his late teens. He was a forethoughtful lad. He was looking forward to the year 1962 when he would reach the age of retirement. So at that time, he bought himself a paid-up annuity, one that would return him 1,000 francs per month beginning January of 1962. Back in 1914, he could have lived very well on that 1,000 francs per month. But my doctor